France attempts to reboot peace negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians. But is there too much division between Palestinians themselves? And is creating their own state the best solution? Also on today's program, foreign fighters on the front lines of Iraq and Syria. Why do democratic Muslim nations struggle to stop their people from joining Daesh? And in Picture This, a holy month of fasting and prayer begins. We see how millions of Muslims mark Ramadan around the world. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Since the early 1990s, numerous attempts have been made to come up with a peace deal between Israelis and Palestinians. Despite hope and optimism from the international community, no agreement has ever stuck, and deepening mistrust and anger on both sides have spiraled into endless cycles of war and violence. Now France is hoping it can revive the peace process. On Friday, Paris hosted diplomats from more than 20 Western and Arab countries to work on a peace conference at the end of the year. Neither Israel nor the Palestinians were represented in Paris, but Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas welcomed the new effort. Our newsmaker today is the Middle East peace process, as we ask if Palestinians can come to a common position and get back to the negotiating table with Israel.
The latest attempt to solve an intractable issue. A French initiative to revive the Israeli-Palestine peace process. Many big political names were there, but the two main players, Israelis and Palestinians, were not. The last round of direct talks ended badly over 2 years ago. This was a chance for other states to create a framework for future discussions.
Fears remain, as does the violence, and hope is fading away. That's why I wanted France to take the initiative to mobilize the international community to support a permanent solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
The Paris talks focused on the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, offering Arab recognition of Israel in return for the creation of a Palestinian state in the occupied territories. But the decades-old stumbling blocks still remain, primarily the status of Jerusalem and the building of Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, settlements considered illegal under international law.
We are building, and we will continue building in Jerusalem and anywhere on Israel's strategic map.
Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. He rejected the French attempt to break the impasse, saying the best chance for peace is direct negotiations. He was encouraging of a two-state solution last week, but he's changed his mind before. During the Israeli elections last year, he said establishing a Palestinian state would be giving attack grounds to the radical Islam against the State of Israel. And with the return to the Israeli cabinet of hardliner Avigdor Lieberman as defense minister, it's hard to see any softening of the Israeli position. In years gone, it was quite clear where the two sides stood and who spoke for the Palestinian cause. But today, a lack of unity among Fatah and Hamas is considered by many the most pressing problem for Palestine's future.
Its purpose must be to implement the visions of both states, based on the border agreement of 1967 and the capital of the Palestinian state being Eastern Jerusalem.
There are attempts to impose new initiatives about what's so-called the resolution of the conflict with the occupation. Those initiatives hurt deeply the conscience of the Palestinian people.
Many believe the Palestinian Authority has descended into political and economic limbo, no longer representing the future, but a past that has failed to achieve any real progress for the Palestinian cause. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss the peace process is Palestinian writer and activist Mariam Barghouti. She's in Ramallah, as is Dr. Abdullah Abdullah. He's the head of the Palestinian Legislative Council's political committee. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. Mariam, let me start with you. In Paris, they've been talking about what to offer Israelis and Palestinians as incentives to start peace talks? Is that how far backwards we've gone?
I don't think it's as much as how far back we've gone, as much as this has been the case throughout. All these peace initiatives that are usually supported or initiated by the international community stem from a very paternalistic view of Palestinians and Palestinian demands, or the entire Palestinian-Israeli milieu. So it's not us going backwards, it is how it's always been. And this is exactly why these talks in France, being initiated by France, are no different than that of Oslo or any other peace initiatives of the past.
Dr. Abdullah, we've had Madrid, Oslo, Wye River, Annapolis. Is Paris just going to be another colorful city added to a list of failed initiatives?
No, I think the start is different. Number one, the start says that there is an international community's responsibility for finding a solution based on international terms of reference. Security Council resolutions relevant to the question, agreements signed, international law, and they are a peace initiative. That's one. Second, it's for the first time a consensus once again is coming that without creating a Palestinian state and ending completely the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territory, violence and extremism will be the order of the day. And that is the cause for this extremism, which is opposite to the Israeli argument that extremism or violence is coming as a result of incitement by the Palestinians and the Palestinians themselves being terrorists and carrying out terrorist acts. So thirdly, there is an international consensus as well that the Palestinians and the Israelis, of course, they have to negotiate with each other. The problem is not with negotiations, but the mode of negotiation is different this time. It's no more the hegemony of the Americans who are taking over the peace process. And in the past 22 years, being the strategic allies of Israel, they wouldn't even press Israel to implement what it agreed and signed on between Israel and Palestine.
So, Miriam, the terms of reference are different. The US is no longer a biased party at the table here. Dr. Abdullah is more optimistic than you are. How would you respond to that?
I think the optimism is an illusion. Basically, all these initiatives are always based on these visions and these hopes, but no one really takes into consideration the demands of the Palestinian. No one takes into consideration that after every initiative, settlements expand, violations by Israel expand. What's happening is people are using hope and optimism as a war weapon against Palestinians. So you just feed a little hope in order to pacify masses, in order to suppress demands, and creating an even bigger state of disillusionment and disenchantment. And I think to hang on to this optimism without really understanding that what's happening here is Palestinians are being forced to make more concessions, more compromises, that none of these initiatives actually speak of accountability, that I don't really understand what we're being optimistic about.
Miriam, you say
more land seizure, more violations?
Yeah, sure. You say to hang on to this optimism. You're implying that, Dr. Abdullah is part of, I guess, you're implying that he's part of the old generation. Do you think that it's time for that old generation to sort of step aside and allow you guys to speak? What would you say to him very directly now?
I think there's a huge generational gap between the Palestinian youth and the older generation. The older generation refuses to acknowledge its failure and at the same time keeps on criticizing youth movements who have been trying to pick up the pieces of what remains from failed attempts in the past. And it's not so much a step aside as much as it is conceding these failures and trying to advise and help the youth rather than criticize and suppress youth movement or younger generations that have known nothing beyond the Oslo Agreement and the reality it has brought on, from economic distress to more human rights violations, to movement impediments and the likes.
Okay.
So it's not stepping aside, it's acknowledging your failures.
Okay, Dr. Abdullah, acknowledge your failures, make space for the youth. Here's a young girl in Ramallah saying this to you. Your response, sir?
First of all, when this revolution started in its recent history, it never said it will accomplish its goals in a certain time of years. It says it's a people's war, and that will take time until it changes the hemisphere altogether. And anyone who criticizes the older generation must, at the same time, recognize that we don't take it by generations, in fact. Those who started the revolution, they brought back Palestine on the map, politically and now geographically. It needs to be legally recognized and free and sovereign. This is a long way to go, and we are not giving up our right. In fact, even the movement that's carried out by the Palestinian activists, it put the Palestine question back on the top of the agenda of the international community, irrespective of the fact that the infighting in the region that is taking away from the attention of not only of the attention of the international community, but the attention of our local Arab brethren.
Right.
Taking it away from that, now it is back on the forefront.
It's back on the forefront. I want to put something to you, Dr. Abdullah.
And this is,
if you'll allow me to come in.
If you allow me just one more sentence.
Sure.
And this puts on us the responsibility of how we carry out our battle, which just started. How to be prepared, how to reach out, how to change things as it has been changing from the Americans to the international community.
Okay, now I want to talk two-state solution, Dr. Abdullah. The French foreign minister said that a two-state solution is in serious danger. A cynic might say, has he been living under a rock for all these years? Of course it's been in danger for a long, long time. On the record, for the record, Dr. Abdullah, do you still believe in a two-state solution?
Thus far, the two-state solution is the only solution that ends the occupation, establish the Palestinian state. Is still possible if there is enough pressure from the international community for both the occupying power, Israel, is to abide by international law, to implement relevant Security Council resolutions, and respect the agreement it signed. Israel has been carrying out all its crimes with impunity. Okay. And that's why there was delay in achieving our right.
Okay, two-state solution for Dr. Abdullah. Maryam Barghouti, two-state solution, two states living side by side equally. Is that what you want?
I mean, the fact that we're still hanging on to the two-state solution shows how out of touch we are with the reality. 42% of West Bank lands are actually occupied by Israeli settlers. The two-state solution is completely implausible. It does not work. I can't believe that a lot of people are still hanging on to it. And if we are to say a two-state solution were to happen, which Israel would never agree to because the potential of Palestinian growth is always a complete no-no. You see it in the demands they make before initiatives, the demilitarization, any demand that basically suppresses Palestinian movement. But if there were a two-state solution to happen, where are the boundaries? What happens to the Palestinians that are still hanging on to the right of return? What happens to the Palestinians within Israel holding
and both sides will be negotiating that, right, Maryam? I want to ask you for the record, are you a one-stater then?
Negotiated by whom?
Do you want one state?
In a utopic sense, I believe that eventually we'd like a one state. But before we can even delve into the one state, two state, we've been dragged into this debate that has further fragmented Palestinian demands and Palestinian will. What we first need to start speaking about is accountability. Before we can speak about any solution, the framework, the basis has to be paved. And that can't happen without accountability. That can't happen with a notion of justice occurring.
Okay, so,
if we just keep
Miriam,
speaking about one state, two state, it's...
Miriam, the Israelis are to be held to account for the occupation, for building illegal settlements. In terms of Palestinian accountability, who speaks for the Palestinians? Is it the Palestinian Authority? Is it a politician like Dr. Abdullah? Is it Abu Mazen? Is it Hamas? Who speaks for the Palestinians?
At this point, no one really speaks for the Palestinians. The Palestinian Authority is a structure that has transformed itself to serve the elites. We have a chairman that has expired his term, who speaks on behalf of the Palestinians, who's going to this, accepting this France initiative on behalf of the Palestinians, when Palestinians here are not even very well aware of what's happening in France. It shows how out of touch everyone is with one another. If they're representing Palestinians, why aren't they including Palestinians in the diaspora in the decision making? They are serving themselves in these initiatives. Our leadership is serving itself, so Palestinians don't really have a representative. We've been fragmented and divided as a colonial tactic by Israel, so we don't have any leadership.
Okay,
we don't have any representatives.
Let's get a response from Dr. Abdullah. Dr. Abdullah, what Miriam is saying is that what she's saying. Let me just finish, sir. Let me finish the question. Can I finish the question? What she's saying essentially is that. But let me add to it. What she's essentially saying is that the status quo is insufferable for the vast majority of Palestinians, but that the status quo is not so bad for the Palestinian Authority. It's quite cushy for the Palestinian Authority. Do you find that disrespectful?
It's unfortunate, let me answer back, but it is unfortunate that Netanyahu will find someone from the Palestinian community who demolishes the history of Palestine, the heritage of the Palestinian Revolution, and the work that has been done in the past decades, and the scores that were registered for Palestine, is trying to deny it altogether. I don't think he or she belongs to the Palestinian community, because what has been achieved in the past almost 50 years of our recent uprising against the occupation is recognized, is registered in history, it is recognized on the ground, and recognized with many countries of the world. I don't think Netanyahu needs more voices to support him in saying there is no one speaks for the Palestinians. This is why he's continuing.
Just to be clear, because we're running out of time. So are you saying that Miriam doesn't represent the Palestinians? That she's feeding into Netanyahu's argument?
Anyone who denies the history of the Palestinian movement in the past half century doesn't belong to Palestinians. Irrespective where his birth certificate is.
I would like to say something to that. First of all, it is absurd to insinuate that I deny Palestinian history of resistance. On the contrary, it is honoring the lives that have been lost.
Of course you did.
That Palestinian community that suffers under an authority that claims to represent them, but in fact has made situations worse for them. And the fact that you are insinuating my criticism of our representation is me playing onto the Zionist narrative is completely absurd. It is because we want to debunk the Zionist narrative, it is because we want to end colonialism that we are speaking out against this authority that is claiming to represent us, that is not bringing out our demands, it is making our reality a lot worse. It's acting as a proxy for the Israeli colonialism, and we need to be more vocal about that. We need to be unafraid about that, and we shouldn't be shamed by Palestinian legislators or authority for being critical of the way things are happening. If our voices are actually heard, then maybe, just maybe, we'd be able to move in a better path or a better direction for Palestinian dignity and more justice for all of us.
Okay, I'd love to continue this discussion, but unfortunately we are out of time. I've got to wrap. Mariam Barghouti and Dr. Abdullah, thank you very much for joining us. Still to come on the Newsmakers, do Muslim political parties help stop extremism? We hear from the daughter of Malaysia's jailed opposition leader. And in Picture This, the holy month of Ramadan begins in most Muslim countries, but not in others. We'll explain why. Malaysia was once held up as a positive example of a Muslim democracy, but investigations reveal a growing undercurrent of radicalization and Daesh recruitment, the highest per capita in Southeast Asia. Nurul Izzah is the daughter of the jailed opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim. She spoke to us about why the country is such a hotbed of radicalization.
If you talk about the statistics, the numbers of foreign fighters from Malaysia flying to the Daesh and ISIS regions are 6 times per capita more than Indonesia. And I think this should be a matter of concern. We see the focus of the government basically trying to silence legitimate political dissent, as stated before, instead of working together with the opposition in condemning ISIS and basically rooting out terrorism as a major problem. When I was detained last year, I was arrested overnight. I met with a fellow detainee. She was 14 and a half years old, and she was arrested en route to Syria to marry off an ISIS fighter. And I think it's really important. It's a problem that's afflicting Malaysia, and the government must transparently acknowledge this and work together with the opposition.
Now, groups like Daesh rely heavily on foreign fighters. According to the U.S. Assistant Attorney General John B. Carlin, the number of foreign fighters for the group nearly doubled to 28,000 in 2015. A large number of those fighters are from Tunisia, a country of around 11 million people. The government suggests 2,400 of them have joined Daesh since 2011. But other estimates say that as many as 6,000 of its citizens have become fighters. Well, joining me now from Leeds to discuss whether political Islam is part of the solution or the problem when it comes to tackling extremism is Afshin Shahi. He's the founder of Bradford University's Centre for the Study of Political Islam. Thanks a lot for joining us, Afshin. What do you make of Ennahda party in Tunisia? They were the ruling party. What do you make of their evolution and them saying, hey, we're going to shrug off the Islamist label and we're going to say, we happen to be Muslims, but we're Democrats. Do you think that that is a turning point and that might help stop young Tunisians from leaving the country and joining Daesh? Or might it play into the hands of the radicals who might say, hey, you see, we told you those guys were sellouts. We told you those guys are not proper Muslims. Therefore, you need to follow me.
This is definitely a turning point for the Ennahda party. And obviously what happened only a week ago wasn't a revolutionary development. From 2011, the founder of the party, Ghanouchi, before returning to Tunisia, he made it very clear he doesn't want to be another Ayatollah Khomeini, and he's not interested to create another Islamic Republic of Iran in North Africa. So over the last few years, Al-Ennahda party, despite the fact it regarded itself as an Islamist party, it tried to kind of work hand in hand with other political parties, secular parties, liberal parties. So what happened actually a week ago was basically continuation of that development. But we only have to analyze that within the context of the Ennahda party. Certainly it was a major development for the party, but it's not going to tell us a lot more about the wider socio-political and religious context of Tunisia. As you said it yourself, there are some estimates suggesting that something close to 6,000 people from Tunisia have moved to various conflicts in the Middle East and Africa to represent kind of jihadi Salafism. And there are some studies suggesting that jihadi Salafism is on the rise, and is on the rise extremely fast in Tunisia. When you look at kind of the rates of unemployment in the country, which is something close to 16%, and the existing political instability, it is not surprising that actually a lot of young men, in absence of a proper democratic infrastructure and democratic accountability, resort to something that they think can actually provide an easy solution. But in reality, not only basically these narratives and ideas can provide an easy solution, but actually they become actually part of the problem.
Right. So, Afshin Shahi, it's been good to talk to you. Thanks so much. In today's Picture This, Muslims all over the world are fasting for the first day of Ramadan. Let's take a look. Today's newsmaker has been the Middle East peace process, as we ask whether it can be revived. France, which is hoping to hold a peace conference later this year, organized a meeting of top diplomats from Western and Arab states last Friday to try to restart the talks. For its part, Israel has dismissed the new initiative and says direct talks are the way forward. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas welcomed the move, but as we found out, the leadership doesn't have the support of the Palestinian youth movement. You've been watching this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. As always, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.